everyone, my name is Evie Lupine. Welcome back to my channel, and today I have another video for you all. A long time ago, I made a video called The Top Merry-Go-Round Problem, which was essentially about a phenomenon I had observed where some bottoms were treating some tops as kink candy dispensers, which was leading to a lot of hurt feelings and top burnout. And I think it's high time that I address this phenomenon again, because based on some recent conversations I've been having, the problem hasn't gone away. In fact, it's only gotten worse. So let's talk about exactly what the top merry-go-round is, why it happens, and what bottoms and submissives can do differently to avoid perpetuating this issue. So when it comes to unhealthy dynamics between S-types and D-types, most of the conversations tend to be about one of two things. Either the toxic, domineering, hyper-masculine dominants who have a habit, if we could call it that, of pursuing young, inexperienced femme submissives, or the equally toxic, usually male submissives, who seem to not realize the female dominants they pursue are real people and not carbon copies of the women they watch in porn. And don't get me wrong, both of these things are problematic, but at least we have conversations about them, you know? What tends to be a lot more insidious is the way that usually female submissives and bottoms mistreat their usually masculine, dominant, and top partners. In fact, I will probably have some people in my comments who will instinctively push back on the idea that S-types are even capable of mistreating their D-types at all, because what about the patriarchy? Or, but the D-types are the ones in control, so how could anything ever affect them? And to be honest, it is this exact mentality that contributes to the problem I want to talk about today. So, what exactly is going on? I think it's easiest to start off with an example and then break down what caused it to go the way that it did. So, let's say that a top and a bottom meet at just your run-of-the-mill BDSM play party, and they both have time that evening for some pickup play. After a short conversation, they realize they have some kinks in common, and actually the bottom already knew the top by their reputation, even before they started speaking. You know, "Oh, you're the whips guy," the bottom will exclaim. "Actually, I've always wanted to try whips. It looks so intense. Could we do that tonight?" And the top hesitates for a second. They really do like whips, but they have been using them a lot lately, and it's almost the only thing they do anymore. Whip guy? They think about all the other fun toys or roleplay scenarios they never get to play with now, but the bottom has been pretty clear about what they're into, and the top doesn't want to miss an opportunity or seem rude by saying no. After all, there was a time just a couple of years ago when they first entered the scene where it took months of going to parties before anyone wanted to play with them. So they agree, whips it is. They negotiate all of the usual things, aftercare for the bottom, safe words, limits, so on and so forth. The bottom identifies as a heavy masochist and enjoys intense sensation. Their primary motivation for play is entering their adrenaline-fueled subspace, which makes them go nonverbal most of the time. Because it can be hard to predict subspace and what will cause it, they both agree on what to do if subspace does end up happening, and the bottom requests that the scene keeps going for a bit but starts to be ramped down once it does happen. With all the details hashed out, they wait for a piece of furniture to open up and they casually chat in between. After about half an hour, a cross becomes available and they get set up for a scene. Since they agree to do a back whipping, the bottom is facing away from the top the whole time, and with the din of the dungeon all around them, it's sort of hard to have much in-scene communication anyway. The bottom requested minimal pauses once the scene began so they could fully get into their headspace, so instead they agree to use hand signs to communicate a non-verbal equivalent to keep going, more, and stop. And pretty quickly, the bottom is using that hand sign to ask for more and more. bottom is very into it. They love the scene. And they're also loving the crowd that forms around them to watch what they're doing. But the top just can't shake off this feeling of disconnection that's happening. Like, they're just sort of being used as a tool to make subspace happen or to impress the audience. But they shake it off, and they keep going, and after an hour or so, they start to wrap the scene up and enter into aftercare, where the top brings the bottom some water and holds them while they eat some chocolate and come back down to earth together. The bottom beams, talking about how many people were watching them, how the marks they got look so cool, and how fun whips are, and they can't wait to do it again. The top knows they should feel flattered, but and they're happy the scene went so well, but something just isn't right. Something was not working for them, and they just can't identify what. Now, I want to clarify that there's nothing technically wrong with this experience on paper. They negotiated, they used several different communication tools, and they both actively consented to the experience and had the option to end it at any time. What went wrong here is much more subtle and exists on an emotional level for the top rather than a technical one. For starters, I think the top here was experiencing the dual pressures of a scarcity mindset alongside having been typecast by their local community. It is objectively harder for new doms and tops to get started in kink, and I think that's for largely a good reason. Not only do new people come and go frequently from the scene, so investing in a brand new person isn't always the best use of one's time, but with D-types, there is an additional risk to interacting with them, as an S-type at least. An inexperienced D-type can cause real harm, either physical or emotional, even if you are a relatively experienced bottom yourself, and they might not be getting into the scene for the right reasons, or at least not the same reasons that you're into kink. It can be hard from the outside to tell a genuine newbie dom from some guy who's trying to use the munch as a way to meet hot freaky chicks like he heard about on some alpha male podcast. So folks tend to give newer D-types a wide berth until they've been around for a while. And though I do think this approach does have some merit, it does have the knock-on effect of creating a sense of scarcity for some people. They will always remember that time when they were constantly ignored or had to make do with whatever scene came their way, and that can be very motivating if painful for people. Having that constant reminder of, I can't be picky because if I start being picky, I won't have any options at all. And then, on top of that, there's the typecasting. As much as the kink community prides itself on its diversity and inclusion, it does love its boxes. Is this a sub or a slave? Is this a heavy masochist or a regular masochist? And for tops, they tend to be seen as most associated with the kinds of play they do in public. The rope guy, the caning dude, and so on. Especially if the kind of play they do is relatively uncommon for the area, they start to develop a reputation that precedes them. If you want to do cupping, go see the cupping guy. Not their name, the cupping guy. This creates a positive feedback loop, and after being seen doing the same thing over and over and over again, people will start to approach that person for just doing that specific thing. And so they end up doing more of it, and pretty soon, it's the only thing they're ever doing or ever being approached for. Because they're the whips guy. Breaking their reputation can be difficult, especially when it means you end up having minimal experience with other types of scenes because people are less likely to want to take a chance on a thing you haven't been seen doing before in public, which, again, makes sense from a safety perspective, but it does still contribute to a problem. So a lot of tops resign themselves to being the insert play here person for a local area because at least it means they've always got a full dance card, even if they're not being satisfied emotionally. The next contributing factor is something that I see coming from S-types as well as being internalized by D-types. And that is the idea that D-types, but especially D-types that say they are a sadist, don't have their own feelings and needs, or those feelings and needs don't really matter. And I don't think people would agree with that sentiment stated outright, but I do believe that people act as though they believe it regardless. There's a few factors that I believe contribute to this. First of all, because this is something I have mostly seen to be a problem for mask tops and doms, I think that vanilla masculine social expectations do play a role here. We all know what I'm talking about, the belief that real men need to toughen up, not share their emotions, and frankly, not even have them. The only acceptable masculine emotion is anger. Men are providers, the strong, resilient, silent rocks. Unless the need is for sex, and even then only the right kinds of sex, men are supposed to be self-sacrificing and not prioritize their own needs. To a certain extent, this also includes an offshoot of the men are simple creatures belief, but applied to BDSM. You know, the idea that all men are after is being able to pleasure their genitals, and anything and everything that gets close to that, as long as it's suitably straight, will make them happy. The BDSM application of this is for mass tops and doms who play with sadomasochism. As long as they're getting to hit someone, they should be happy about it. The emotional content of the scene, the feedback they do or don't get, all of that stuff shouldn't matter. Essentially, tops and doms are these big bad sadists who like doing anything and everything and are satisfied only by hurting others. So their needs are implicitly met just by virtue of doing basically any kind of scene at all. Again, I don't think people would agree with this if it was stated to them directly, but I do think that the way people often treat doms and tops in their scenes and in negotiations reflect some degree of this belief being present, if only subconsciously. You would be shocked at the number of times I am told by a new play partner that I am the first bottom ever to ask them what I consider to be some fairly basic questions, What do they need for aftercare? What kind of emotional experience do they want to have during the scene? What kind of feedback do they like? Do they like being touched back during a scene? And if so, what quality of touch do they want? And having been told this over and over and over again by people who have been in the scene for years, if not decades, it made me realize, oh crap, we have a problem here. We have to start negotiating differently or we are going to burn out our tops, especially those who are more emotionally motivated. That's the third factor, how we teach people to negotiate, and figuring out what to do in a scene is critical. I'm not saying we should throw the baby out with the bathwater here. I think we just need to add some nuance and make negotiations more of a two-way street as opposed to a one-sided interview or Q&A like it so often ends up being. People falsely assume that aftercare, safe words, and limits are really only for S-types, and I have seen those beliefs be called out more and more, but we have to go further. We need to be actively asking our partners what their aftercare needs are, how they want to feel, what their limits are, what their goals are, what motivates them, and especially if we want to break that typecasting prison, if there is anything that they'd like to do more of, they don't usually get a chance to try. Now, not everyone is going to be comfortable with this, I'm sure. If someone has never been asked these things before, they might not have an answer. So I recommend keeping a few suggestions in your back pocket. Do you like to be cuddled? Would it be okay if I tried some verbal reassurance after the scene is done? Things like that. If they don't know, they don't know. But if you have a regular play partnership with someone, that is the perfect ground for inviting them to experiment and discover what works best for them, assuming you feel safe doing so and it falls within your own limits and boundaries. I'm not asking anyone to compromise on what those things are for them, only invite their partner in to knowing what that looks like for them as well. Something almost every S-type should practice more of is showing appreciation for their partners. This could be in the form of verbal affirmations after a scene like, I know that was a lot of work for you. Thank you so much for giving me your time and energy like that. Recognize the effort, emotions, and time they're putting into your play together. Unless your partner is an exhibitionist, I recommend avoiding comments that externalize the experience too much, like talking only about how many people were watching or how impressive it must have looked. That's nice and all, but if you only ever feed someone's ego, they're still going to starve. try feeding their heart and their mind too. Make it clear it is about them and what they do, how they are special to you, not how they make you look to other people or how they crossed off some kink bucket list experience for you. Essentially, make them feel seen. I think doing this practice just by itself helps combat the subconscious belief that tops and doms are scene-making robots who are satisfied just through the play itself and don't need anything else. I can pretty much guarantee that if you have a fun time during a scene and make a point to show your appreciation in a meaningful way, the door will be open to even better repeat experiences. I really do think that when you are building appreciation on appreciation, even if you think it's obvious, even if you assume they know, don't assume, keep building on that, and it'll just get better and better over time. If you give more, they will give more. Seems pretty simple. And now, D types. 2 pieces of advice for what you can do differently to avoid being trapped on the top merry-go-round. 1 is be in touch with what your emotional needs are before you get into a negotiation. If you haven't ever thought about this before, it might take some time, but really ask yourself, what feeds you in a scene? How do you feel appreciated? How do you know you did a good job? What reassures you? What emotional experiences do you want to have? How do you want to relate to your bottoms? Do you actually like platonic play? Or do you prefer romantic or sexual connections? Is there anything you wish you could do during aftercare but you've been too scared to ask for? The answers you find here might surprise you. You might want to feel powerful and in control, sure, but you might also want to feel cared for and desired yourself. There are no wrong answers here, only what's true for you. And that feeds directly into my second action item for y'all. Advocate for yourselves during negotiations, and don't be afraid to set emotional boundaries. Now, I think tops are generally pretty good at asking for time, date, kind of the basic stuff. But you are not a bad person if you discover you have a limited capacity for, say, platonic play, and you prefer scenes that have room for other, more intimate connections. It's okay to say, hey, I am so excited to do this scene with you, but I only have so much bandwidth for platonic play. So because I already have a scene planned for this upcoming party for that kind of play, I would prefer if we make time to do this next week instead. Does that work for you? And if your play partner is anywhere near an empathetic person, they'll hopefully understand and respect your emotional needs the way you respect theirs. As long as you aren't being coercive or trying to pressure someone to do more than they want to, there shouldn't be an issue. And if your play partner isn't asking you about your aftercare needs, your limits, your boundaries, feel free to bring them up yourself. This really goes for anyone, but I think D-types specifically need to hear it. If you need a hug after, ask for that. If you need some praise, ask for that. If you don't ask for it, you're never going to get it. And the worst thing that can happen is they say no. So, in summary, the top merry-go-round is a persistent problem where tops and doms are treated as essentially interchangeable rides that give people kink experiences without needing or getting any emotional fulfillment themselves. They are simply satisfied by doing the job. Maybe in a word, people think that all tops are, at some level, service tops. That's not really a word, but a phrase maybe is a better way of framing that. And it is something that compounds with multiple other issues like the pressures of vanilla masculinity, like the pressures and the ways that we think and feel about scarcity and how people relate to their internal sense of dominance and sadism and how other people perceive sadism and what assumptions they make about people who play with sadomasochism on that side of the slash. And it is something I think you can step off of, but when you get stuck on that top merry-go-round, it can feel like you can't step off because, well, if I opt out, no one's going to want to play with me anymore. I'm going to fade back into the background. I'm going to lose all my relationships and I'm going to be irrelevant. I'm going to be replaced by, the hot new person on the block who's got all the fancy toys and whatever. And I'm not saying this is true for everyone. I think there are a lot of people out there who are very much fed by pickup play, platonic play, getting to do a bunch of different types of scenes with a bunch of different types of people. But I think if more tops and doms were honest with themselves, if they could be. I think a lot of people that do a lot of pickup play are not actually as fed by it as they hope they would be. And it can be a struggle to develop those play connections into full-on relationships. And it can seem like you can't really have both. But if something is not working for you, if something does not feel right, if you feel like after you play a whole lot, like if you have a whole weekend and you're dealing with a very severe amount of emotional drop where you feel not only bad about yourself and like kind of the typical, shame and guilt way that a lot of sadists tend to feel after a lot of play, but on the level of like, people don't care about me, I feel used, I feel exploited. Like if those feelings are coming up, you might be on the top merry-go-round. So hopefully that makes sense what the top merry-go-round is and why it happens. And it is just this really unfortunate trap that I think we, as a society, we don't, we kind of recognize, but not really, we don't really recognize the fact that it is possible to be exploitative even when you are not necessarily in the position of obvious visual power. And the top merry-go-round is like a perfect example of that, because it's this idea where tops and doms are sort of forced into performing this role for the sake of someone else and kind of trying to get their needs met along the way, but they're not really doing it for themselves. They're doing it for other people, and they feel trapped and contained by that. And what is that if not a form of exploitation in a way? And this very much intersects with another idea that I've talked about in a different video called Dom disillusionment syndrome, which Race Banned came up with. And it is essentially this idea that there are certain bottoms and submissives who want to treat their partners essentially like pretty dolls that are meant to perform a role for them and are meant to be these perfect figures of dominance that meet all of their fantasy expectations. And when they realize that their partner, their dom, their top, is a real person who has flaws, who has emotions, who gets sad, who, has life crises happen and they have to cancel or reschedule, they get really upset with that, and it kind of breaks the spell for them, and they are only really wanting to play with people who can stay in that kind of perfect false role of the one true dom. And I think that desire happens in the top merry-go-round as well, where you kind of maintain this illusion sometimes, or some people will maintain this illusion for themselves as seeing doms and tops as, again, being an emotional husk, not really having their own needs and kind of just being satisfied by the act of sadomasochism alone without any other context to it, just no specifications whatsoever. And that is not necessarily the case for everyone. So I will link that other video down below if you want to watch that one, and also the article for that as well, that idea of Dom disillusionment syndrome. I can't link it, but I'll put where you can find it down below. And in any case, I'd love to hear thoughts about this one in a comment down below. I am sure doms and tops, you got some strong feelings about this one, put them down below. If you are especially a sub or a bottom that had a reaction to this of I don't do that, that's not me, let's talk about it in the comments down below, because I think sometimes when we have that initial defensive reaction of that's not me at all, how dare you, there might be something in there that is worth exploring. Certainly not all subs and bottoms do this, but I think even in small ways, we can contribute inadvertently to this larger problem, depending on how we talk to people, how we do our negotiations, how we pursue people. It's always worth refining those skills, being more inclusive in the way that we negotiate with our partners, and always, I think, for me, trying to keep in mind how I am building this into something bigger and better, where we're both going to have a more positive experience together. That's always what I'm trying to figure out, is how can I make this more, how can I make this even more emotionally fulfilling for both people? Really my goal in life, both for my channel and also for my personal kink life. But in any case, thank you all so much for watching. Again, leave your thoughts in a comment down below. If you've not already and you'd like to, please do subscribe, because I make videos twice a week about all different kink and BDSM related subjects. And finally, if you want to support what I do, the best you can do this with Patreon. Link to that will be down below. If you do already support me there, thank you so much. It means the absolute world to me. And until I see you all next time, I hope you have a great rest of your day and a great rest of your week. Bye-bye.